In this episode, we're continuing our conversation on radical integrity, part of a series continuing from last week. By now, I know you're excited about this topic and may have your own ideas. Let's dive in to continue our understanding of radical integrity.
Another aspect to integrity is this idea of freedom. Does integrity as a practical concept result in a greater sense of freedom, especially recognizing that we as human beings must engage in larger systems? We're not agents on our own. How do we establish and maintain our integrity in the quest to belong within those larger systems?
Integrity it's always on the test. Like, I don't think any of us can be 100% sure that we are always, leaning on integrity. I think integrity is what we use to assess what we have done during the day and whether or not, like I said, maybe it tastes good or no. But it's always, if we think of the systems that we have to navigate, say economic, say social, and the imperative of belonging, because we want to belong. There are things that we need to do. And I guess if I say, for instance, if I say, I'm going to do something for you, I will see it through. But will that give me the access to your trust? I do not know. So I will try to protect my integrity, but it will always be on the test. And depending on how the other people react to me, perhaps I will not do things that are nice all the time, right? But so one of the things I always think about, for instance, the environment is huge for me. Like, I want to protect the environment with everything I do, with my choices, what I buy and everything. But I live far away from my family. And I know that flying is the most polluting activity that any human being does. And I fly. I have to go. So, and I do it because my integrity is, I need to see my family. My family comes first. And the price is, I compromise on the value of the environment. So it's very difficult to be 100% on any of these things. So at the end of the day, we just test it and try to show up. Yeah, different contexts call for different versions of that integrity, if you will.
Yes.
It's like a big I, a capital I and a small I integrity, right?
Precisely. Yeah. Precisely.
One of the dynamics that challenge me, especially as a professional trying to find a place, is how do you hold integrity in the face of power, of this sense that I am not as fully an agent in certain systems, agent for myself in certain systems, as I certainly would like to be, but I do hold aspirations for myself. I do have goals of achieving aspects of life that I might be told are good things to have, and therefore I'm pursuing them. May not necessarily be true to myself, but I'm on the hunt. So in the spaces of power, where there is that differential of power, holding to aspirations, how do we navigate that while still remaining true to ourselves?
I saw the
Michel.
young people jumped up on this one. I defer to the young people. When Tiffany had their hands up, yes, they have something to say about this. I'm anxious to hear.
Well, it's two things for me. First, I just wanted to go back to the sort of original question you asked in this line of conversation, and that's about, is it freedom, integrity? And I think it's at once freeing and also very restrictive. And to tie that to what you just asked, and why I put my hand up about how you navigate that in systems of power and finding yourself within those systems and within society more broadly. I think the way that I generally navigate it, and this is why it's both freeing and restrictive, is that at some points I'm sacrificing not my values, but what we're talking about, my sort of radical integrity, that top level integrity, to navigate those power structures and to progress, to be in a position where I can be more influential, be more impactful, and have a greater sense of freedom and have a greater sense of integrity. So it's sometimes I think integrity itself is not on a spectrum, but the way in which it's practiced and expressed for the purposes of survival, freedom, navigating those spaces, that it is very much on a spectrum. And you can be sometimes very much to one side in terms of integrity, that sort of radical side of it, if we're putting it in those terms on a spectrum. And sometimes it for survival, and not only for your own survival, but for to make progress for yourself, others, you're required to. So I think it is very much, like I said, both freeing and very restrictive, especially if you're a person who's at the forefront of making whatever changes it is, or of establishing yourself in a particular area where there might not be very many of you or very much of what you're trying to bring, or where there are people who may not necessarily agree with the direction that you want to go, maybe some sort of novel idea or leadership style or approach, but you have to make sacrifices sometimes, and sometimes those sacrifices cause internal conflict to help you decide where along the way, where along the scale how am I going to practice this in this moment? And when I go to bed tonight and wake up and look at myself in the morning tomorrow, have I compromised myself in a way that is acceptable for the progress that needed to be made at the time? Or do I have to take a hard look at myself and say, yeah, this was a hill to battle on. This was a hill to die on, and I didn't. And I significantly compromise my integrity and by extension, my sense of self and my sense of wholeness, and causes you to really have to reflect deeply on what's important in life. Is it that next stone professionally? Is it the way you're viewed by your friends and family? Is it the way that you show up in society, and the yardstick you're using is what society says is okay or isn't okay, or is too much or isn't too much? So, like I said, very, very much can be freeing, especially when you identify who you are in life and you're really feeling comfortable in that, and you're rooted in things that your values and the people around you, and you have that support. But extraordinarily restrictive when you are not 100% surely footed and are still trying to figure out how to navigate those spaces, especially when they are within the confines of different power structures, or structures that have underlying power implications for you, depending on where you find yourself within them.
Very nice. Thank you, Tiffany. Cadeem?
Oh, yeah. So I just want to try to build on that, because you mentioned the issue of like integrity as being on a spectrum. I guess kind of on the lower end of it, one thing with navigating power structures is sort of, if it's not always too much of a reality, I guess, in terms of being able to block out certain ones. But if you're looking for a job per se, and then even if you're at a stage very desperate for work, I think there's certain things that you usually would avoid if you know that the job will basically be a huge clash just at a surface level with your integrity. I think one example, using the UpSkill textbook, is if you know that honesty is very important to you, and you going for a job as a salesperson, where commission based and so forth, and then kind of to be the best, you might have to possibly maybe not outright lie, but maybe mislead, not divulge things, twist facts, things like that. Then that is kind of like a very obvious, the value clash, and then that's one that obviously threatens your integrity. But it can be much more subtle than that, though. Even getting into an organization where the outward kind of slogan, so forth, outward values, mission seem to mesh very well with yours, but then you're seeing what once inside, and maybe once a little bit more embedded, that maybe there isn't, there's the real culture is a clash of that, where everything is kind of done more for face value, And then that's a situation where it's tough to decide, practical level in terms of, finding a new job and so forth, but in terms of the impact it does have on your psyche, basically, day after day, if you feel like you're compromising yourself. And that can be a tough one because there are people who genuinely change things from the inside, like a Tiffany and so forth. But then there are also people who might start off with that mentality and then over time just basically not, lose the strength to really fight against that, to really try to make a difference, die on any hill. So that definitely becomes a tough battle, and not everyone, it seems like, is really cut out for it. So that's one thing. When it comes to the issue of freedom, which is kind of the central question, it seems like it can be almost the lack thereof, that in a sense, when it comes to working in the institutional system. But I think the freedom that really comes is more about, hopefully that kind of mental state that you get into, if you know that what you're doing doesn't compromise what you do, or compromise how you feel, what your values are. I think that's kind of the freedom I think about when I think about how integrity leads to that. It's more about a place of long-term mental happiness, which is not just happiness for the sake of happiness. I think like that actually gives you more clarity, more productivity, and so forth, and more motivation if you feel like what you're doing meshes with your values.
I like how we put this idea of values front and center in this exploration on integrity. Question is, are all values the same? Do we all share a common value? And if we don't, then does that create space within our larger systems for different individuals to show up with integrity?
It's taken us up, it's taken us down, and it's brought us right back to the understanding that integrity really means being whole on your own. Thank you for listening. UpSkill Talks returns again next week.